So David, thanks for coming on, man.
No, it's a pleasure to be here, Adam. Thank you.
So for those who don't know who you are, aren't aware of who you are, please introduce yourself, what you do, what's your background, etc.
Yeah, no worries. So I wear a few hats. I recently had someone introduce me to the term blended professional, which is it accurately describes what I am, but I don't like it because it makes me sound pretentious and full of myself. But basically, at the moment, I am completing my PhD, I suppose, in applied strength and conditioning or exercise physiology. So I look at inter-individual and sex-related differences in adaptation to resistance training. So basically, why do we not all respond the same to the same stimulus in resistance training? And is there a role for biological sex in there? Do men and women respond differently? And if so, why? So that's my research domain, along with some kind of other interest in a healthy age and sports nutrition and stuff. Um, then also I work for Rugby Academy Ireland, so I'm director of education and research there. So my research aligns with that. There's a rugby focus on my research, and then within the academy, I oversee some of the educational programs we run, and would be the lead tutor on some of our personal training S&C diplomas. And then with our full-time guys and girls in the academy, I help with some of the sports science and S&C side of stuff with the management of that as well. And I run my own business then, I suppose, consultancy along with that. So Synapse Performance, which would be working one-to-one with athletes, also consulting them with some corporate entities. Most namely, probably I'm the research and development officer for Uplift, so a strength and conditioning and coaching software. So I'm involved heavily with those, and then just a few other kind of consultancy gigs here and there. So again, I'm a man that easily gets bored, so I have to try to keep myself busy.
Yeah, it sounds like you're doing a lot of different things there. I don't know how you get time to do them all. Um, yeah, that's great. So it's very interesting, David. I wasn't aware that your PhD was on the differences between or the potentially the differences between female and male's ability to gain muscle. I think I might have heard something before previously where, and I don't know if this is right, but females are can actually gain at a similar rate, but they just start at a lower kind of lean body mass. Is that true? Or obviously that's
Yes,
very that's very washed down, and you're researching it, so it's not probably quite so clear cut, but that's what I heard
yeah.
before.
So like, there's a huge gap in the literature here, and it does appear so. Like I again, and this is speculation because we're still waiting on the data to come through, but there has always been that kind of thing. Is like, oh, women don't gain muscle as the same rate as men, but it appears that they are more than capable of doing it. It is a case, as you say, women just are starting from a lower lean body mass, so it's just the same proportional rate doesn't translate to the same net amount. So you know what I mean? If someone is gaining, again, an outrageous amount, 1% of lean body mass per week. If you're starting at 30 kilograms of lean body mass compared to 60 kilograms, it's twice the amount. And that obviously has a compounding effect at the same percentage gain. The men will see larger increases week on week or whatever your testing period is. So I think that's one factor. And then in an athletic population, I think the main differences we see at the moment could simply be down to training age, because just with even in athletic populations, women seem to be introduced to resistance training and structured resistance training at a much later age than their male counterparts.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And if someone was gaining 1% of their 1% of the lean body mass per week, I'd wonder what cycle they're on. Um, but so what's the difference then between, say, personal training and strength and conditioning? I know that's something that's often, or people often misinterpret it, that it's the same thing. Um, can you tell us what the difference is? I know that I when I did my personal training cert or whatever you want to call it many years ago, I think had completed it in the weekend because it was one of the ones that you can do online. You just need to self-study, but I had already pretty much known a lot of the stuff. So it was a bit of a joke, to be honest. I need it for insurance purposes. But what's the difference then between personal training and strength and conditioning?
Yeah, it's that would be a rabbit hole to go down, because I suppose personal training is viewed as that kind of within the gym environment, with general population, I suppose is what it's viewed, working at one-to-one with Gen Pop or running exercise classes, spin classes, whatever it may be, where strength and conditioning has been viewed as for athletic populations. And even when you do your personal training diploma, there's like add-on certs for personal trainers in S&C. And again, it's aimed at working with athletes or people with sports performance goals. So that's classically what it would have been seen as, that personal training was working with general population for kind of general health related outcomes, where strength and conditioning is working with athletic populations for more performance based outcomes. Now, that's not to say that health and performance are mutually exclusive. They can often be one and the same, not always, especially at the elite level. But for me, I think that the scope really needs to change, and the two industries need to become aligned in a certain way, because strength and conditioning, I think, has applications, and strength and conditioning coaches have skill sets that are applicable far outside the sporting domain. I personally would like to see strength and conditioning coaches kind of utilized more so in the community-based setting, in terms of, like, essentially what most of them are highly qualified individuals in terms of resistance training. That's their bread and butter, and niche domains of resistance training often. But they could have quite an effect in a community setting, encouraging older adults to engage in resistance training, to working with children in the community, maybe obese children, or and developing their fundamental movement skills, introducing those to resistance training. Because I suppose that's my goal in long term, is to be an advocate for resistance training for pretty much everyone, for all populations. The evidence is there to support that. I don't know, like, the question, say 20 years ago, the question was, oh, who should resistance train or who would benefit from it? Where I think, based on the research now, it has to be flipped, that the question is, who shouldn't resistance train? And the answer is very, very few, if any, individuals. So I suppose that's kind of where it is that personal training have developed foundational level skills in the general domain, that they can work with a wide range of people and help them to achieve general and health related outcomes a lot of the time, where strength and conditioning coaches have been trained to a higher level in maybe the strength side of stuff and the conditioning for sports performance. But that being said, people in general, there's kind of S&Cs are put up on a pedestal as being kind of higher qualified professional, but there's a lot of S&Cs that would not make good personal trainers, that they would not fit back into that. So again, I'd like to see the two industries become more aligned or work harmoniously. But to be honest, I think the biggest damage that has been done is that it's been called strength and conditioning, and that kind of pigeonholes it into one little area, where if it was kind of more around athletic development, maybe, or I don't know what you would even kind of call it, because when you pigeonhole people into just elite performance and athletic performance, I think you nullify a lot of the good work that S&C coaches could do, especially considering the amount of S&C graduates we have for very limited jobs in elite sport.
Yeah, that's true. So with your role then, as part of the academy, do you coach not just in terms of, or do you not just build like their strength plans or strength training plans? Do you also help them with their conditioning and their fitness as well?
Yeah. So we'd work right across the spectrum with them. Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting. So kind of good segue into, I suppose, what would be the difference for training in a sporting environment, or for sports performance, versus training to just generally get bigger? And I think probably for most sports that at least have some form of power element or some form of contact, even if it's a non-contact sport. I think just getting bigger just seems to help. I remember when I was younger, I used to play basketball for the underage Irish team, and I just naturally started lifting when I was in fourth year. For people who don't know, that's probably around 15 or 16. And I guess I kind of just adapt. I grew kind of well from training, and I was consistent. I really liked it, and it helped a lot because I wasn't that talented, but I was much stronger than people, of course, who don't lift, and it just helped me a lot when you're going to the basket or defending, rebounding, everything. It just seemed to help for everything. And even then, when I kind of got older and stopped playing, I used to be put in the post as an inside person, but I'm 5'11". So, yeah, it seems like most people who don't do any resistance training benefit from doing some, getting a bit bigger, stronger in whatever really sport. I'm not sure about maybe running, etc., getting much bigger, but is there a major difference, or when it comes to, say, the higher levels, what's the differences between training for sport and then say just for just getting bigger? Because I think unless you're really genetically gifted, you really can't get too big, to be honest, naturally.
Yeah, it's a good question, and again, I always kind of maybe boringly harp on about it. Just comes back to principles and keeping the goal, and I think that always has to be, because for me, when I think about sports, I'll reverse engineer a sport. I'll say, okay, what are the demands? What do we need? What kind of profile do our players have to have? And we have that data. We know what an international prop looks like, an international front row. We know kind of generally what size they need to be. Um, so we look at, what profile do they need to have to play at that level? What are the demands of the sport? What do we need to be? And that gives us a goal then to shoot for. We know, okay, from a performance standpoint, these are the metrics that we're kind of generally aiming for. These are the profile we want. And then it's reverse engineering that back to the first principles of, okay, to achieve these goals, what is the adaptation I'm trying to achieve? What is the desired outcome that I'm doing? Because that's, again, all the training is, we're trying to apply a stress in a strategic way that elicits the adaptation that we want to achieve. So I always ask myself, like, what is the adaptation I'm trying to achieve? And then once I'm clear on that, I can then say, okay, what is the principle that needs to be applied to achieve that adaptation? And once you are clear on, this is my adaptation, this is the principle that must be adhered to and applied, well, then it's just your methods are countless, because then I can say, okay, for this given individual, this given athlete in this context and environment, I choose this method as the best way to achieve that. So in a hypertrophy perspective, there's no difference in terms of the adaptation we're trying to achieve. It's hypertrophy if we want to put on lean body mass. Now, again, I will say largely hypertrophy is hypertrophy. There is some evidence of, especially if you look at Cody Hahn's work, that there may be some evidence for sarcoplasmic versus myofibril hypertrophy, but that's really only a kind of the extreme high-end pump kind of stuff. For most sporting contexts, hypertrophy is going to be hypertrophy. It's not going to change.
Do you think that, just to ask on that before I forget, do you think that there would be much of you think that then would translate to less force, say, if there's more, say, sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, because it's not necessarily contractile tissue? Is that what you're...
that's the general theory, that if we got that sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, that you wouldn't see the same increases in strength as a result, because, as you said, the tissue just isn't contractile. So we know we need the contractile tissue. But again, I don't think that happens to any significant degree within the training paradigms that we generally use in sport, because to elicit that, it does seem like you need some very high volume, high rep work, kind of low intensity. And I suppose at a cellular level, it makes sense that your sarcoplasmic adaptations then would be more to facilitate that high buffering capacity needed, high, I suppose, energy crisis that's going on in the cell through resistance training, rather than just high muscle tension. But again, hypertrophy is hypertrophy, and we know what principle we need to apply. We need to progressively overload the amount of muscle tension we're putting on a muscle via volume, I suppose, is the best kind of surrogate measure over time. And what translates well to sport then is we see better hypertrophy outcomes from training through large ranges of motion, from training at long muscle lengths then as well, which thankfully translate well to sport, because in sport you have to use large ranges of motion. You have to oftentimes put in uncompromised positions and generate force from long muscle lengths. So again, the hypertrophy is the same, the principles are the same. You just, I suppose, the nuances come in the methods you may use, and how you structure the program. Because the difference between just training for hypertrophy purely is you don't care about performance. You know what I mean? If you're just training as a bodybuilder or for aesthetic purposes, you don't have to perform at the weekend. You don't have performance training, and you don't have to do a lot of high intensity cardio along with it. So that's the biggest thing, is balancing the sports performance training and the conditioning and the technical training with the hypertrophy training. Because if it was just pure hypertrophy, we could probably do more, afford to do more volume and do more work. Because with any athlete, we have a limited amount of stress we can place upon them in any one time frame, and that is usually a training week or a training block. They have a limited amount of stress. Now, everything they do is going to tap into that amount of that stress capacity. So if they're doing an on-pitch skills session, there's some of the stress gone, their capacity gone. If they have a match, that's more stress gone. So if it was just hypertrophy outcomes, 100% of our stress capacity we could devote to resistance training. But with rugby players or with athletes in general, we don't have that luxury. We need them that they are not overly fatigued or stressed to too much of a degree from the resistance training, that when they go onto the pitch, they tear a hamstring or they tear a quad muscle, or they don't perform well and get dropped then from the weekend, or we've overreached them too much in the gym and then they have a poor performance on match day on Sunday and they lose. And then, okay, oh, we put an extra half kilo muscle on them over 6 months, but they've lost the tournament. That's no good to us. So it's about finding that balance and that. Now, what I will say is, when you work at a high level in rugby, you are lucky where the raw, what would you say, the I don't like using the word product, but the raw product you're working with is much better. In terms of, if someone has got to senior rugby at a high level, the more than likely, just through survivorship bias, are someone that has better genetics, that respond well and are able to balance these two modalities of training. Because you don't really get someone at that high level that struggles to put on muscle mass, or that isn't able to hold a high degree of muscle mass while engaging this high volume of on-field training then as well, because they've probably been weeded out and dropped at 14, 15 years of age or 16 because they don't respond that way.
It's a bit mad that I know it's in any sport where the money goes, the resources go, but that the ones probably that are coming through the ranks need the resources more so than the guys at the top, maybe to kind of help them perhaps get there. But it's when they get to the top, when they've survived, that's when they get all the support that they could need. But how do you balance? It's quite easy if you're looking at just hypertrophy, or just if you're just a powerlifter or something, to manage that fatigue and the overreaching. Well, looking at your sets and your intensity, etc. But then when you're adding in sports on top of that, with like a match or training, skill sessions, how do you kind of match? Because it's like a resistance training session isn't the same as a on pitch training session. So how do you kind of match that volume to look at the overall, like, allostatic load or whatever you want to call it, to say, okay, we probably need to pull this back a little bit here, or now we can push a little bit more with the resistance training?
Yeah, so as you said, that's the correct term. Your allostatic load, the amount of stress, the total amount of stress being placed upon the organism or the athlete. So you're going to use your different metrics, and I suppose how you periodize and set up your training paradigm is going to have a huge influence. So within a typical training week, you know what I mean, in terms of your gym session, it's fairly easy to quantify the amount of volume they're doing through whatever metric you want to use: tonnage, number of hard sets, just general RP, average intensity, average RAR that you have them working at. You can modulate that. But the on-field stuff, you can have a big influence on that then as well, because we're able to control some of the factors that we can control. Time on feet, we can, how long are they actually standing up on the pitch, moving about. We have the GPS units. We'll have targets for how much we want to cover in a certain session, and we'll break that down within a certain session, how much of that or what proportion we want to be high speed running meters, compared to just, we'll have total distance covered, what proportion that should be high speed meters, and your different bandwidths. And in an ideal world, it doesn't always happen, but you would work collaboratively with the coaching staff then as well to kind of understand what do they want to get out of the session, what is their priorities, what do they want to work on. And then if you have a good relationship, you'll be able to make suggestions by, okay, well, if you're doing these small-sided games for the purpose of working on that skill or that tactic, maybe if you set it up and you suggest the weight, because we know that people working in a 5x5 square will cover a lot less distance and won't accumulate the same level of high speed running as those working in the 10x10 or 20x20 square. So we can manipulate the constraints of the environment to elicit some of the demands that we want, whether we want to work on accel, decel, or accumulate a lot more high speed running and total distance covered. So that's what you're trying to balance then as well. But that being said, I think as sports scientists, we sometimes can put too much faith in, or too much belief in how well we're able to plan. You do need to be, I think, dynamic and be able to auto-regulate on the fly then as well, because we can monitor the gym stuff, we can monitor the on-field stuff. We have our wellness surveys. We know on any given day what the subjective ratings are of our athletes in terms of how fatigued they feel, readiness to train. You know, we can go into, you can look at some of your objective markers. You can look at resting heart rate, HRV, all these measures. But sometimes it is simply having that ability to have a conversation with an athlete, read the athlete, and then make a call. Like if I have a high profile player on that, you know, is going to be our key player for, say, a match on a Saturday, and on a Thursday morning we have a gym session and he's saying to me, you know, I'm just not feeling it today. And he's supposed to do 3 sets of heavy squats or whatever it may be, just for example. He's like, I'm not feeling it. And he's like, I'm just not feeling good or whatever. I'd like to take it easy. Again, you'll have some players that are just trying to maybe lazy or that. But if this is someone that normally loves training, big match on Saturday, and telling me not feeling it on Thursday, your risk to reward there, yes, I've planned that ideally you should do 3 sets of heavy squats. But if I force that athlete to do it, they're going to be pissed off at me. They're going to be pissed off in general. They probably won't go into the squats with the same intent that they normally would or should have. And then someone in that mindset, am I getting the best adaptation from them? Am I putting them at undue risk of injury? Or am I better off saying, okay, tell you what, do me a favor, just warm up, do 2 sets, 70%, and then get on the foam roller and hit the sauna for a while. That athlete has still done enough that, you know, we're getting some degree of stimulus, depending on what adaptation I'm trying to achieve. But the coach, have put them in a good mindset. They feel they're more recovered. They feel then that they're going to be in a better place for Saturday. So even if it's strategic use of the placebo, that's perfectly fine, in terms of your job is to elicit and put the athletes in the position that they can get the best possible performances on match day. So like that, it's some of those nuances that you have to be careful about. And then from a global perspective, just setting up your periodization plan. Like there's some adaptations, like I don't prescribe to block periodization because I don't think it works well in a sporting context. I would be more aligned with something, I think it's termed kind of vertical integration, where you're always chasing several adaptations all the time. But depending on the time of year and the athlete in front of you, you're just going to dial up the emphasis on one adaptation after the other, over the other. And some of those adaptations are more kind of suited to off season, pre-season than in season. And then within that, I think what works well, kind of high performance sport, is this vertical integration model, also coupled with a high-low model, where we'll try consolidate all our stresses, say on a given day. So say, for example, if we have a match on a Sunday in our training week, Monday is probably going to be a low day in terms of the overall stress and load we're putting on people. So that's going to be your walkthrough, kind of low intensity pitch sessions with more working on walkthroughs, maybe some of your upper body work. Then Tuesday might be our high stress day. So that's where we're doing lower body strength, power work, and maybe our on-field conditioning and our hard contact session or whatever. So, and then Wednesday, low, Thursday, a high day, and then Friday, a low stress day leading into day off on Saturday, or a walkthrough on the Saturday, and then match on the Sunday, or whatever it may be. So I think learning to balance that stress, because you can't go high intensity, high stress all the time and expect these people to perform well and not break.
So do you use those kind of subjective feedback mechanisms as a way to see what their kind of injury risk is? Because obviously if you're in a lab, you'd be checking like creatine kinase levels, something like that, but you can't be taking muscle biopsies after every training session in the gym. How do you know, or how do you perhaps mitigate that level of injury risk when they're coming into matches? Is it, like you said, don't put heavy sessions before games, or before a few days before games?
Yeah, well, I think conceptually there's certain things you need to get your head around in terms of, as an S&C coach, we're almost have become brainwashed that our main job is just to prevent injury. And that it's not true. Our main job is to put the athletes in the best position for performance. And especially at elite performance, you're always, it's kind of walking a tightrope, where in terms of, I want to maximize adaptation without pushing them too far. But if I undercook them, then I've left some gains on the table. So you're always trying to balance that. And when you're working at that level, injury is inevitable. And especially in a game like rugby, injury is just going to happen. So this idea that you can't mitigate, or you can mitigate it, but you can't eliminate injury risk. All you can do is know the risk factors and reduce the known risk factors. So like that is avoiding these huge spikes in training load week to week. Again, I wouldn't prescribe to the acute to chronic as such in terms of a sweet spot, but understanding huge variations in load week to week is probably not good. Having weak athletes is not good. Not having them exposed to high velocity, max speed running on a weekly basis is probably not a good tactic either. Not training them through full ranges of motion. These are all the things that we need to do to lower our risk. And then look at the chronic train load. So yeah, subjective markers in terms of athletes. And it's, again, we don't have the science to go too complex into it, but it's just simple things of, looking at people's, how are you sleeping? How do you feel overall? How excited are you to train today? How is your muscle soreness? Where are you sore? And if you have this on a dashboard, that enables you then to have a conversation. And that's essentially all this subjective stuff does, is initiate a conversation that you can then look at an athlete and speak to them. It's like, okay, I saw you said the hamstring was a bit sore today on your wellness. And then you talk to them, how are you sleeping? And sometimes, it's lifestyle factors, they're stressed, there's something going on either at home or in a relationship, and they're just not in the mood for training and their headspace is not right. So again, that doesn't mean that you're going to pull them out of training. They still need to train and their stuff, but this is where I suppose the art comes in, with having a conversation with other coaching staff, the medical staff, or a physio if it's on staff, weighing up the data you have and kind of making an informed decision that, okay, for this player, what do we want to do? Do we want to tell them go a bit easier today? Take, you don't need to get involved in the condition at the end of the session or something like that, and managing that risk. But again, there's no exact science to that, because what I often say and talk to people, if it wasn't exact science, if it was a case that we just simply measure metrics and take data, and then that data solely is what influences our decision, well, then we don't need an S&C coach. Then we can simply write a few lines of code and, make savings. So that's it. And we're not at that stage yet that we can write a few lines of code that makes a decision whether an athlete trains or not on a given day. So you have to, you make these calls, and sometimes they don't go the way you want, and someone pulls up with a strain or a tear or whatever. But you have to live with that. And then sometimes someone's data is exactly textbook where you want it to be. They're hitting all the metrics, and then they go out and something just tears, and that happens. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned about the kind of using AI or something to have an app. You see that in nutrition now, where there's like a coach, like a nutrition coach that adjusts your macros or something based off what you've done previously. But I guess it's a lot less complex than what a sports scientist would do.
But even within that, AI within, and there is some great apps. That's fine if you have the behavior change and habit side of stuff nailed down. But AI is not going to change behavior as such.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's why, like, I have a few clients that had previously using them, and it doesn't take into account, like you said, the allostatic load or the fact that they went on the piss on the weekend, and you can't just say, well, just start again, or don't do that. It's like, it's obvious they knew that wasn't the best idea. But so I guess then with some of the top, say, rugby players, they're like extremely strong, just genetically just gifted athletes. We know then, I guess, that a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle if you're looking at isokinetic force or whatever. So would it make sense then? Because like on the pitch, they're not like doing a bench press really. I know you are grappling and you are, using your strength like in a way that's not necessarily the same as the movements you do in the gym. Does it make sense to do, say, higher repetitions because it's potentially safer than, say, someone benching 180 kilos? Or is there actually transfer from the lower reps into the sporting context? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a good question. And this idea of transference or dynamic correspondence, as it's called. So what we do in the gym translates to increased performance on the pitch. I suppose like that, if the goal is hypertrophy, there's several ways to do it. We know that we can use that higher rep, lower load, versus higher load, lower rep. Once we're going to the same kind of reps in reserve, we get similar outcomes in terms of hypertrophy. The caveat being, if you're using lighter load, you don't get the same increases in maximal strength or maximal strength expression, I should say, as tested by 1RM. But that's a bit of a rabbit hole to go down.
That's what I kind of mean. Yeah, like, yes, you're stronger doing a 1 rep Mac deadlift, but how does that transfer then to?
Yeah, so I would have a tendency to go towards that higher intensity, high load, especially on the compound based exercises, because for me, I don't think that there is much of a difference in injury risk between if I load up a squat and I want my athlete to go to 2 reps in reserve, 1 rep in reserve. I think it'd nearly be safer doing that with a 5 or 6 RM load than it would a 12 RM load, because again, once we get to that same kind of low velocity, low concentric velocity reps, those as we're approaching failure, I think it's easier for athletes who maybe resistance training is not all they do. So like a power lifter or a bodybuilder is skilled at resistance training, and a good one is skilled at those movements. It's what to do day in, day out. and have good motor control even when approaching failure. Where I'd prefer my athletes to have to keep concentration for 3 or 4 or 5 reps rather than having to keep concentration for those hard reps after doing 10 reps previously. You know what I mean? And if I can get the same hypertrophy outcome and along with a max strength outcome, that's going to be what I'm aiming for, because the relationship to on-field performance, there's a very strong relationship between strength, maximal strength, and sprint speed, maximal strength and jump speed or jump height, jump distance, your power measures then as well. So yes, they're not doing a bench press on the pitch, but they are moving an opponent. They are in the ruck, they're cleaning out the ruck. So you're still doing the same thing. You need, and again, this idea of transference, it's not that we want to replicate what we do on the pitch in the gym. I want to make the athletes strong in the movement domains and movement categories that they will do on the pitch, and make the muscles strong through a full range of motion. Like, okay, they're not going to bench press on the pitch, but they're going to do a lot of horizontal pressing movements in different ways. They're going to, if you're in the line out, you're lifting in a vertical push. So if you try and sport is chaotic, you know what I mean, where the angles and joint angles which will be required to generate that force on the pitch is variable. That if I tried to replicate what we do on the pitch in the gym, I'd have to do, benching from, I'd need a highly accurate bench that I could bench from nearly every degree and angle possible, but it's not the case. I want to get my athletes strong through the fundamental movement patterns, through a full range of motion. If any muscles are weak, I want to strengthen those muscles. But once I get my athletes strong, and there's a point where strong is strong enough, I need to get them and teach them to express that strength more powerfully. And again, this will change from the phase of the season and time of year. But that's essentially what we're trying to do. We're trying to get them strong because there's a big relationship between strength and performance on the pitch. And also one of the biggest injury risk factors is muscular strength. Stronger athletes get injured less and expend less energy when running or engaging in locomotion.
So that's kind of a good segue again into the functional training. We talked about a bit off air, and when people often think about training for sports, they think of Olympic lifts or other kind of complex lifts where everything seems to be made more difficult by either trying to balance on something or doing one on one leg or doing one arm at a time or something. It's functional training, and obviously it makes sense, the word functional training, but is that something that is recommended to be doing these kind of exercises that perhaps work on balance at the same time as doing movements, or are they just kind of novel ideas that don't really have any weight?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and the term functional is something that I don't like as such, because okay, if you're a power lifter, why are you doing a bench press? Because that's your function. That's what you need to do. So every exercise is functional, because again, they all are going towards a goal to be able to perform in a certain way. If you're a bodybuilder, why are you doing bicep curls? Because you need the function of your biceps to be a bit bigger and symmetrical on stage. So, you know what I mean? Every exercise has a function. And this idea that by standing on a Busu ball or something like that increases the functionality, I don't really get it. And a lot of the time it actually limits what you can get and the adaptations you can get, because okay, if I want to, why are my athletes squatting? Because a lot of coaches, a lot of people in general get hung up on the methods, like, oh, what method should I use? Where for me the methods are relevant. It goes back to the principle and the adaptation, or the goal. What is the adaptation you're trying to achieve? What principle do you need to apply to do that? Now, what method you use, I don't care. You know what I mean? It's, if I want to, like, I always pose a question when I teach this in class to people. I'm like, okay, what's the best exercise for quad hypertrophy? Is what I say. And normally squats is what I get. People are like, oh, squat or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, it's a good one. Let's say, for example, you don't have a squat rack. What do you do? And people will come up with another one. Oh, well, you can do goblet squat holding a dumbbell or whatever. I'm like, okay. And then I have pictures that pop up as like, let's say your client or your athlete was in a car crash. They have plates in their back. They can't hold any axial load. What can you do? And again, you boil down to, you keep going, and then people say, well, I don't know. And that's people that only know methods. That if you ask them how to increase quad size, right, or squat, leg press, no, that's methods. How you do it is you apply the principle. You lengthen and contract the quad muscle under tension repeatedly and bring it close to within a couple of reps of volitional failure. And you do that, progressively overload it. That's all you need to do. How you do that is up to you. So, you know what I mean? You can do that through a leg extension. You can do it through a belt squat or whatever it may be. But all those are methods. It's just about understanding the principle underneath. That's the most important part. So to tie that back, if I'm saying, why am my athletes squatting? I'm getting them to squat because I want to increase their maximal strength. That is the adaptation I'm trying to achieve. That's the outcome I want to achieve. I want to see an increase in their maximal strength expression. Okay, if that's the case, what do I need to do? Well, I know, again, I need to progressively overload them with high degrees of muscular tension. So I need to use high load training in general. Whether or not I need to bring them to close to failure, that's for strength, not necessarily the case. But okay, I need to increase my athlete's ability to squat heavy load. So that is directly proportional to the amount of force they can generate into the ground. Yeah, that's simply all we're doing. We're generating force into the ground that pushes the barbell up. Now, if I put my athlete on a Buster ball and ask them to squat, I've added a layer of instability to that. So now all of a sudden, their ability to generate force into the ground is compromised, because we know that it's, again, if you, and people think about it, if I ask you to do 1RM squat and I ask you to do it standing on foam or standing on a wooden platform, what's going to likely lead to the bigger number being lifted? It's stability. We know that we want a nice stable surface. So by removing that, I've added a layer of complexity, and okay, maybe we'll get some stabilizer muscles turning on, whatever that means. But I've compromised my athlete's ability to generate force into the ground. Therefore, the load they can lift is significantly reduced. Therefore, if my goal was to increase their squat strength, I've hampered that. I'm going to have lesser of an adaptation than what I could have achieved if I just removed that muscle ball. People are like, yeah, but their stability muscles is like, yeah, stability muscles are turned on just the same under high load. So again, it's this idea of functional training is something that I don't get, and there's not much evidence to support that. You know what I mean, in terms of these low load perturbations. So, and that's the thing, where you're on a Buster ball or you're standing on something, maybe you see people catching something on one leg, and they're like, oh, what's that doing? It's like, oh, it's strengthening the ankle, you know. So, and I'm like, okay, for what though? They're like, oh, so when they cut on the pitch, that the ankle is stronger in that position. I'm like, okay, so you have someone balancing static on one foot and catching a ball. Okay, great. When they're running near max velocity and they go to do a cut, and they have 5, 6, 7 times body weight forces going through that ankle at high velocity at an angle you're not replicating by standing on one leg, are we really going to get that much transfer in terms of, you know, that the ligaments, muscles, tendons, proprioceptive ability of the athlete is going to be that much enhanced? No, I'd rather put them, get them strong, powerful, mobile in the gym, and then put them on the pitch and let them practice the skill of sidestepping. That's what really is going to have transfer across to that. So again, it comes down to just the SAID principle, specific adaptations to impose demands, and that's the way you need to think about it. So again, function and some of these things we see, and again, we see these on social media, on Twitter, doing these crazy exercises. A lot of the time I try to check myself and be like, okay, you don't understand that coach's rationale. Maybe they have a good rationale behind it. So I won't comment until I see it. But a lot of time I try and come up with a rationale for it myself, and struggle. And it is a case that sometimes athletes do some stupid stuff in the gym, sometimes record it and put it up on social media, and people are like, oh, the coach has him doing this. Like, maybe that athlete was having a laugh, did it himself. Maybe the coach doesn't even know this is going on. Maybe the coach is doing something just to get publicity on social media because they feel their job is not secure, and they're trying to promote themselves in a different way. So, you know what I mean? Like, again, say for your audience, they can pick out 100 influencers on Instagram, and to see them doing these shitty little bodyweight circuit exercises and all this, and you're like, and this is what they're promoting to their followers, and you're like, that's not what built your physique. So don't, like, that training is not what got you to where you are. And the thing is, most of these high level athletes, they become a high level athlete, they perform at the high level, and then they start doing this kind of off the wall training. So that's not the training that got them there. They're already there, but they're maybe bored, or their coaches experiment with them, and then they're doing this stuff. So that's not, that stuff that you maybe sometimes see done at the highest level is not what got them there. It's what they're doing when they get there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And you often hear that, like, I've often heard it firsthand from, say, clients or something, or even friends that, want to get in shape, but they also would say, oh yeah, I want to be able to do like the muscle up, or some of those body weight movements that extremely difficult because it's has more function for you sitting at your desk doing your job. Or when I used to work in a gym, there would be functional training class, and you'd have middle-aged women that would be smashing a tire with a hammer. It's like, when are they ever going to be using a hammer? Like, it's the housewife, or they have a job like in an office. But it's mad. So final question for you, David, is I know, like, a lot of people listen who do play some sort of sport as well as lifting. They may not have access to strength and conditioning coaches, and often like if they work with personal trainers, or even online coaches, they're not necessarily strength and conditioning coaches. They're just people who, like, as you know yourself, there's loads of people who are online coaches now since COVID, and really they're just personal trainers that don't have a strength and conditioning background. How would they apply the principles of what you mentioned into their daily life? Because I know that what you do is, your job is often to manage these variables for the athletes that you work with, but person by themselves might not be able to have that access to a resource like that. And maybe you're wondering, okay, do I need to cut my training volume down a little bit now? Because they might be reading training volume principles or landmarks, I should be doing 10 to 20 sets, but maybe I'm training doing a few sessions now with the lockdowns, for example, opening back up. I maybe start training. Do I cut down my training sessions or the volume, or do I do less sessions? How do they kind of start to think about these things?
Yeah, it's difficult because, as you said, that's what we're kind of S&C and sports scientists are paid to do. But I suppose conceptually, it's important to, as I always say, keep the goal and reverse engineer. So, what is your goal? What is the outcome you're trying to achieve? Where do you want to get to? And if that's a sporting context, you're looking at the game. Okay, what do I need to do to perform well in that game? What are the physical attributes I need to have? And a lot of times there's technical and tactical side of stuff is a whole other area you can go into. But a lot of time it's understanding the demands of the game, understanding, that's what where do you need to get to be at perform at the highest level you can for your sport or for your goal, whatever it is. And again, people do this in bodybuilding. What is the physique that's going to win on stage? Where now to get to, and deciding, okay, how do I get from along that journey? And once you understand that, where you are now, where you need to go, and have that clear, then you just start understanding, okay, and then put into a hierarchical structure. So, because obviously you're going to need to perform the whole way along. Same with bodybuilding, you're going to have shows all along before you get to the highest level. So you're going to say, okay, for me, what's the next lowest hanging fruit, or what's the next most important thing? So if I say, this is me now, this is where I need to get to, what is the biggest thing holding me back at the moment that I could tackle? So you're asking yourself, what is in the foreseeable future, or the next whatever time that is, training block, half month or half year, what is the priority that if I accomplish that or improve that will lead to the biggest improvement in performance, or get me closest to that? Because you know what I mean, if you, for bodybuilding context for your listeners, if you're looking at yourself, okay, for me to win at the level I want to, the biggest difference between me now and there is my calves are not up to scratch, and my delts are not up to scratch, or even to go, yeah. So say, let's say calves and delts. Now, if you're asking someone, if someone then spends 2-3 years focusing just all on the calves but never got the delts are more important in bodybuilding than the calves ever will be. Yes, you want a whole rounded physique, but it does, if you've big calves but narrow little shoulders, you're never going to win a bodybuilding show at that. So it's again understanding, yes, we want to improve it all, but having a systematic approach to what is the priority, why is it the priority, and then how should I get there. So once that's the case, you're clear on where you need to get to, where you are now, and you should have some degree of testing in there, and some sort of objective data. And bodybuilding, that's your skin folds, your gut measurements, your profile, or your progress pictures, your body weights. You're triangulating all this data to say yes, or I am making progress, or no, I'm not making progress. And then you just adjust the variables as you go along. So based upon where you need to get to, you adjust these variables, and then understanding the principles. I think, like, for S&C, I want most athletes in all cases, to be strong in the fundamental movement patterns. I need athletes that can squat well, hinge well, vertical push and pull, horizontal push and pull, um, rotate well, and do loaded carries well. These kind of things. These are all the kind of functional movements, if you want to use it, or the movement patterns that I want strong. That they're strong in all those movements. Then I can start dialing in on, okay, we need to get them strong or more powerful in this specific pattern, because that's going to have the biggest transfer. And then once you are clear, you've listed out what your adaptations are, then you're like, okay, I need bigger delts, I need bigger traps, or I need X, Y, and Z. You're very clear on your outcome goals. What are the principles I need to apply to do that? And if you don't know the principles, you can research that. You know what I mean? If you, okay, I need bigger traps. What do you mean by bigger traps? Well, I need hypertrophy in the trapezius muscles. How do I elicit hypertrophy? Principles of hypertrophy, progressive overload, muscle tension, all these things. Once you understand the principles, well, then you can just look at it and say, okay, now I understand, I'm clear on what I need to achieve or want to achieve. I'm clear on the principles need to be applied for my given situation, for my context. What's the best method to use? You know what I mean? And then on top of that, I think the big thing that needs to be addressed in most things is, what is the rate of progress I want or I am aiming for? Because you know what I mean, if I want to hypertrophy someone, say for a rugby player, you know what I mean? If I got them to give up rugby and go full time at bodybuilding, I can get them to their hypertrophy goal much quicker. But we don't have that luxury. So you have to accept that, yes, this bodybuilder will get to that hypertrophy goal quicker than you will. But you need to be comfortable with that compromise that, look, we're applying the principles of hypertrophy. Well, yes, we could get there faster, but by getting to our end goal faster in one domain, i.e., hypertrophy, that's going to significantly compromise and put at risk the other factors that you are chasing. I think that needs to be the same with people in their daily lives, that there are times when, yes, we're always trying to progress, but the rate of progress will not always be the same. There are periods in our life when our job is going to take priority, or relationship will take priority, or there are other things, other facets of our life that become more of a priority than our athletic goals. And at those times, I think people need to accept that there are periods when it's okay to accept a reduced rate of progress, or even just a stagnation, that, look, I'm going to do the amount of training and volume that allows me just to maintain what I have now for the next 3-4 months, because I have a big project on at work and I can't devote the amount of time I need in the gym to keep progressing at the rate I want to progress. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. There's a lot there, but I think to sum up, the people, they really need to understand what they're trying to achieve if they're doing sports and weight training together, and not just kind of say, okay, how do I, what should I do? What's best for me? To think about what adaptations are they trying to elicit, and really kind of map it out themselves. That makes a lot of sense. David, it's been great having you on. Where can people find more about you and the work you do?
Yeah, so everything just through Synapse Performance. So synapseperformance.ie. So SYNAPSE performance.ie, or just on Instagram, Synapse Performance. You'll kind of find me all through there.
That's great. And you have a podcast as well, which is, if people want to learn more about sort of sports science and things like that, I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, the Synapse Performance podcast. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. Thanks a lot, David.
It's been a pleasure, Adam. Thank you.